Those of us of a certain age grew up watching him in the Monty Python films, Fawlty Towers, A Fish Called Wanda. But I have got major brownie points with my children when I told them I was heading off tonight to host an event with Nellie Headless Nick from the Harry Potter films. Such is John's transgenerational appeal. His appearance tonight, though, at the Press Club harnesses one of his other big passions, and that is speaking out against the bad behaviour of some news outlets in the UK. John has been involved with a group called Hacked Off. I'm sure many of you are aware of it. It involves other celebrities like Hugh Grant taking a very strong stance against some of the News Corp papers over in the UK, given their past behaviour on phone tapping. And John undoubtedly will have some very strong words to say about media intrusion. And if we're lucky, he'll tell us about an epic Twitter war he engaged in last year with Piers Morgan, which... if you search both of the names on Twitter, it was quite a spectacle, and John Cleese well and truly won that war. I'm very happy to say. Our interlocutor tonight is one of this city's, if not one of the nation's finest broadcasters. John Fane had the absolute privilege a couple of years ago of being on stage with John Cleese on one of his previous tours, doing a very funny Q&A with him for a few shows in Melbourne, and he is withering with excitement, quivering in his boots with excitement about the prospect of repeating that. Ladies and gentlemen, in the fine tradition of English comedy, harnessing another great name from the annals of great English comedy, please welcome the two Johnnies, John Cleese and John Fane.
How do you do satire in the era of Donald Trump?
Billy Connolly said to me about 15 years ago that when you're trying to be funny about current events, you have to stay just ahead of what's happening. And now, of course, the comedians have been overtaken. I mean, how can you make fun of Donald Trump? Do you see what I mean? I remember Will Rogers, the American comedian, once said, "I don't make the jokes, I just point them out." Well, once you've pointed out Trump, what could you say about him, quite seriously, that would be funny? Do you see what I mean? It's already extraordinary. How can you make that funny? Because I don't know. If somebody said to me, can you write jokes about... I used to do jokes about Donald Trump. I used to refer to the dead squirrel that he kept on top of his head. But you can't do it. And this is my feeling on the whole now. I just think, I may be completely wrong, but it looks to me as though the whole world is falling apart. In every area, in every way. In my own beloved England, I don't know if it's really beloved anymore, London certainly isn't, it's now all about money. And wherever I go, it's all about money. I mean, Christopher Hitchens may blame God for everything, I believe, but blame greed. It's spoiling all the sports now. And I absolutely, I'm watching it just crumble around me, but I don't think it matters because I'm going to be dead in 10 years anyway. And other people can clear it up. I don't have the energy anymore. I just want to read a few books.
But are you a fan of Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the left now in the Labour Party?
It's very interesting what's going on because I see it as a slight reflection of my own business. You see, when I was in doing the show at the O2, the Monty Pythons did 10 shows at the O2, huge arena in London, 16,000 people. This is about 18 months ago. And on the second night, Terry Jones did a very odd thing. He was taking his guitar off, and because he was in a hurry to get back on stage, he banged himself in the eye, and he didn't realize, but he cut himself. And we then sat down to do a sketch together, and suddenly I looked at Terry for the first time, because he didn't speak at the beginning of the sketch, and he had blood running down his face, which is not what you expect in a light review, you know. And I was thrown, and I missed my lines or something until we got back into the script. And when I saw Eddie Izzard afterwards, who was wandering around backstage, I said to Eddie, "I'm sorry about the fluff." And he actually took me aside. He said, "No, I want you to understand this, John." He said, "It's more. They know these sketches. They've seen them hundreds of times. They probably know them better than you do. But when something like that happens, it makes the evening special." Now, this was the complete opposite of everything that I believed 40 years ago. And I think in some strange way, the general public, if you can talk about them in that sense, has got fed up with stuff being presented to them, and they're looking for some sort of authenticity. And I think that's why Corbyn and
Sanders,
and even in a, well, crazy sort of way, Trump, is that somehow they don't seem mass-produced. They don't seem as though they're all being told what to say by marketing people and PR people and so forth. So it's like people want authenticity. When I was younger, I'm absolutely sure that some of the politicians used to actually build arguments. And there was a time round about Margaret Thatcher when it became unnecessary anymore to justify an argument. You simply asserted that something was the case, and that's most of the time I don't know about anything. I think I have reached a stage of wisdom which I think Socrates defined as realizing how little you know. And I'm not trying to sort of be falsely modest, but I realize there's almost nothing that I actually understand. But the comforting thing is I've now realized that almost nobody knows anything about anything. And every time I hear people speaking now, I simply think, oh, well, they have no idea what they're talking about. But the problem is that a lot of them have no idea that they have no idea what they're talking about. You know, I tried to become a journalist with Newsweek when I was in New York in 1965, and I failed because I don't see there's anything more honorable than going out and trying to find out what the hell is happening and tell people clearly and interestingly what's happening. I think that's a magnificent and noble profession. And in England, if somebody comes to do a profile on me, what I know is that he or she has sat down with the editor and already figured out what story they want to write, based on old press cuttings. And then they will ask odd questions, and you're thinking, why would they ask me that? It's such a strange question. And the answer is they're trying to get one or two quotes so that the story that they want to run can be justified by a couple of quotes. That's crap. And anybody who thinks that's journalism, ought to be drummed out of the profession.
So, John, social media is, of course, the disruptor to the industry that a lot of the people in the room work in. You will get to your Twitter war with Piers Morgan in a moment, but do you consume social media as well? Do you
I
keep
don't
track?
even quite know what it means, but Stephen Fry said to me 3 years ago, if you can build up a big Twitter following, you can avoid any need to talk to the British press. And that's what I did, and I now have 5.25 million people. Now, I have to tell you, I don't know where they are, and when I actually write about the British press, I don't get anything like as many hits or retweets as I do if I tell jokes. I was in a Perth fish restaurant, and I tweeted a sign on the wall that said, if you buy a fish, we will throw it at you so that you can say that you caught it. Now, I don't know if it's an old joke, but I put that up, and that got an enormous amount of hits. Whereas the stuff when I'm moaning on about Paul Dacre doesn't get a great deal of stuff. So I don't know, but what it does mean is if I'm doing a show, then most of the people who are interested in coming to the show will follow me on Twitter, and I can say I'm in Melbourne for the next 3 nights, and I don't have to do an interview with the British press who will sort of come in and then explain why I'm a rather silly, nasty, cranky person. But 4 paragraphs in the end, when most people have stopped reading anyway, they will mention, but he's got a television show coming out on Tuesday, And I'm not going to put up for that anymore. But to that extent, Twitter's become enormously important to me because I can hit back at them.
The most excellent book that you wrote,
Excellent.
which I happen to have a copy of here, called So Anyway, which came out how many years ago now?
I think the hardback, came out at it's been out about 16 months, and the paperback's been out more like 6 or 8 months. It sold 400,000, and it's very good. It sold terribly well here, Canada, the United States. It got beautiful reviews in the United States, and also sold very well in Europe.
First of all, it's extraordinarily readable and funny, but it's like a potted history of British comedy from The Frost Report, The Footlights at Cambridge, and you bump into Pete Cook and Dudley Moore and Marty Feldman and Rowan Atkinson and everybody you've worked with all the way through. And then it stops. When's the sequel coming out that brings it through to some of the other glorious features of your career that this book doesn't cover?
Well, the truth is, I asked my agent recently, and he said, you'll have to get on with it because it's due in 2018.
I congratulate you again, and I did last time and I do again. It's one of the best showbiz accounts
thank
I've
you.
ever found. It's funny, it's illuminating, it's just full of, it's like the best hits of John Cleese.
There's a story in it, which is a true story about a teacher at a school where I was a teacher, and it's about killing a rabbit. And I think it's the funniest, blackest thing I've ever written.
And it's one of many stories. And I, look, as someone who grew up
Oh, stop crawling.
of an era where you had no credibility. If you came to school the morning after Monty Python's Flying Circus had been to air and you couldn't recite the sketches, you had no credibility
And
whatsoever.
I understood that because it was exactly like us and The Goon Show. You see, we'd listen to The Goon Show, Peter Sellers, Spike Milligan and Harry Seacombe, and we would all get there the next day and go through them. It's extraordinary that comedy has this, it's almost as though the fans are following a football team. Do you see what I mean? And I never understand it, but I've tried to understand it. And I think it's because the world is essentially absurd. And apart from the Buddhists, no one else has noticed. And I think the young people in particular are drawn to this kind of comedy because the loveliest thing anyone ever said about Monty Python was that after they'd watched a Monty Python, they were unable to watch the news because they couldn't take it seriously. And I think that's the really healthy role that it has and why it means so much to people emotionally.